Matt has been a friend for, I don't know.
Over a decade.
Over a decade. He really has, yeah. Really met him really early on as he was building Cloudability. And there's a couple things you could say about him. First of all, he looks like Ricky Gervais.
Sounds like Ricky.
Sounds like him too. Not quite as funny.
Or offensive.
Or offensive. That's true too. True too. No, but I think one of the things that I've always realized is he's passionate about people. And he's passionate about the people that he works with. He's passionate about community in general, and really genuinely cares about helping people that he meets and works with. And so because of that, he's been heavily involved inside of the startup community, inside of mentorship, and so yeah, happy to call him a friend and glad to have him up here for kick off the year. So with that.
Is that my cue?
Matt Ellis, that's you.
Thank you.
You turn that on? That's got a little red.
Yep. So what's the big deal about Cloudability? So we started Cloudability in 2011, and today it's the market and thought leader. It was acquired by IBM for $4.5 billion, and it's still going strong. So when you've got the word IBM before your company, your startup, and it's 13 years later, and it's up here on the top right of the MQ, I'd say that was a win, all right? I didn't get much of that $4.5 billion, but it was great building up the company. As you see, we started from 3 of us and brought it up to a couple of hundred employees and sold it to private equity, and the rest is history. On the way, we created an industry called FinOps. It's a way of looking at technology like a supply chain problem, and there are 100,000 people in the world with the word FinOps in their job title working on cloud spend management today. So this is why I tell you how we did it, how great we are. You've got to listen, write this all down, and do it like we did it. I think that's bullshit, basically. I think there's a space for business books like the one that Dave put up. In particular, those books are very useful for the saying, when the student is ready, the teacher shall appear. So when your thoughts are ready to kind of apply to a technique, or there's some insight that can apply it, great, read those books. My favorite bugbear in this is the book, and I always get the title on, The Hard Things About Hard Things, made by Mark Andreessen, or Ben Horowitz, sorry. It's a famous book he wrote about 10 years ago. I call it 100 Men Walked Across a Minefield. I survived, this is how I did it. Because the guy who missed the mines with that silly walk, and there was that tuft of grass, he was sure had a mine under it, he doesn't know that that was why he got across it. He might have just been lucky, all right? But when we fuck up, boy, we really know what went wrong. When you step on that landmine, the guy who tried to get off it and failed has got a lot to teach you, if he survived, about getting off mines. And I think we should do more of this as a collective, as a community. I've had a lot of help from people who've been very candid with me, said it's too late for me, but you can still save yourself. And so I'm here to tell you how we fucked up on the way to creating a $5 billion company. And that's because we have a high confidence, we've got real data. Now, we don't know every way we fucked up. We might have made a mistake and not recognized it, but here are the ones that we think we did. And before we go further, I just want to be clear what kind of startup we're talking about. Now, startup is basically any company that's getting going. I'm talking about startups where the goal is to create wealth by selling the company through proving the economic and technical viability of an idea. You've got to get there as quickly as you can, and most of the time, you have an investor and some board of directors, and you're never going to make a penny, all right? And that's a fundamentally different way of running a company for profit from the start, where it's sustainable. And if any of you are here with the crazy idea of running a business for profit, there's the door right now, you can go. We're talking about the mad dash to try and prove it or die trying, okay? So here's some lessons we learned along the way by making mistakes. So the first one is ask the stupid questions. Now, I was lucky enough I've done various startups, we'll come to that in a minute, but I was lucky enough to work for some great companies like Goldman Sachs and PepsiCo, Frito-Lay, and in those companies, when you turned up, it was very clear what you did. And in fact, the first day at Goldman's, I was 20 years old, there was a memo on my desk from the chair of the board of partners. In those days, this is decades ago now, Goldman's was privately owned by 166 partners, and this guy was the chair of the board of partners. And I didn't know that you could do those photocopies with 2 colors. The old cyclotron things where so the signature was blue. I thought it was personally signed by this guy. And it said, welcome to Goldman Sachs. At Goldman Sachs, they had a thing in October where they had a longer one, We insist on the highest levels of integrity. We changed on our brand. You see how times have changed. He said, and he said, if you cannot compellingly argue that you're helping a client or helping an associate help a client, you are fired. There is no grey area in this matter. Sincerely, Jared. I was like, whoa, I've still got this memo, all right? So great companies are very clear what they do. Not so great companies, I worked at some of those too, we just go through the actions, but we're not quite sure where it's going, all right? So knowing the end-to-end is hard, and you turn up and no one's answering those questions, and you ask the question, well, what do we do here exactly? Like Frito-Lay doesn't make chips. Frito-Lay makes machines that makes chips. Pepsi-Cola doesn't make cola sodas. It markets sodas and other people make them. So there's this interesting, like, once you know what you're doing, you can get harder on it. And in startups, there are some basic questions that no one ever explained to me. And I found this out the hard way by having the wrong investors or the wrong capital structures or something like this. The first thing is that when you do a startup of the type that I described, which is high growth, you're committing to getting an investor. Step one. Step two, you're committing to sell your company. It's not your baby, it's a vehicle to make your investor their money back. How much money do they have to see they might make to make an investment? The whole of the fund they're investing from. So if you're getting a $250,000 check from someone with a $5 million fund, they will only make that investment if they think there's a way one day of getting 20 times their money back. Now, one of the challenges in this area is that we're not full of shit. We're going to change the world, all right? And we tend to talk to investors with a little bit of modesty. So when I came to the United States, we had sold a company in the UK, we'd recovered a .com company. I'd made a huge amount of money by British standards, which has 2 zeros missing from US startup standards, right? And I was paid not to work. In Europe, you can't have a non-compete. So I was on this thing called garden leave. It's literally called, in your contract, garden leave. And for 6 or 12 months, they pay you not to work for anyone, all right? So I'm on holiday here. I was 28. I was renovating my house in the UK. So when I went home, sometimes it wasn't, how do I stay with my mother? And people would say, what do you do? And I say, I'm unemployed and I live with my mother, which is kind of being humble or modest, right? And Americans will take you at your word. I had one woman go, all right, and just walked off. And I go, come back here, come back here. I was being modest, all right? So in this area, we're not clear about this. Don't pitch to an investor if you don't have a viable way of getting them their fund back. And as you raise more money, the amount of money they're hoping to make back goes up, okay? So now, because you've got this investor and you've committed to sell your company, that person is going to be, particularly the bigger ones, they're going to be in your face every day for the next 5 to 7 years, all right? Treat it like a long-term relationship. And in particular, if you don't share the values, you're going to have a really hard time because you are like a married couple, you're going to argue and they're always going to be pessimistic about the risk-reward return and you're always going to be optimistic. So you have to have a good relationship, you have to have good alignment. And the best way to do this is to be really clear before you take that check. Why are you investing? What do you think we're doing here? Make sure you've got the why. Because when you don't, you have all kinds of, it's one of the most stressful things, and I've been involved with so many founders who've got the wrong person on their board, the wrong investor in their cap table. Of course, that's the people coming to fix my gate finally calling me after a week of trying to get them to call me. So, of course they did. I said to my wife they'd do it in the middle of this talk, and they did. And tip here, the smallest checks are the hardest to handle. You want some grief, you want someone getting mad at you, you want someone refusing to sign the documents in time, that's your $10,000 check. That's your Uncle Ernie who wants to come in. Don't take it. Only take professional investors who are writing checks at least 25, preferably 50K or higher. So that's lesson one. And by the way, we'll have time for questions at the end, but if I'm saying anything that just doesn't make sense or it seems to contradict what's up on the slide, please put your hand up and ask a clarifying question. All right. Second lesson. It's not what you don't know that will get you. It's what you think you know just isn't true. Okay? And this comes in 2 flavors. The first one is easier to recognize. It's your investors, your board, all right? They can be very, very, very confident and equally wrong, okay? And you'll know this because your gut will be going off. I got to a point where one of my investors, who became a good friend, a big supporter of us, he wrote me an email one day basically saying, can you fly the ship into the sun? And instead of arguing with him and saying, Jason, that's bullshit, I wrote, Jason, I've learned that when you tell me something I think is completely wrong, I ask questions and you, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. And he says, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. Don't fly the ship into the sun, all right? I mean, he wrote this long email about how to do it and he completely misunderstood the situation. And if you're a first-time founder and you've not done this before, you'll do, yes sir, and I'll fly the ship into the sun and everyone will go, what happened, all right? The harder one is you. Now, there are basically two types of high-growth startup. There's one's based for tech and product guys, and there's one based for sales or commercial guys. It's the same thing. Whatever you're good at, you'll do too much of. And whatever you're not good at, you won't do enough of. You'll have very powerful, strong, self-deceiving reasons why it's not worth doing more there. We're not ready for that yet, all right? No, that's exactly the stuff you should be doing. And typically, it's your product guy, so we need more engineers, we need more designers, we need more features. The product's not ready yet. No, we'll do sales later. We'll hire a great marketing person later. And generally, try and do less of what you find easy and more of what you do not so well, and get better at the things you're not doing so well. But beware of that self-convincing that, there's a phrase I was talking to Ron at the beginning, when all you've got is that hammer, screws are stupid. Okay, so you know how to bang the nails in. Oh, those screws, we're not ready for the screws yet, okay? And I'll give you some examples on this. An investor decision. There were three mistakes, and I'll talk about mistakes and errors later, but there were three mistakes that if I could go back and flip the bit, would have made Cloudability 10 times more successful. The first one was, we went through a phase where we grew our revenue 40 times in 2 years. Company exploded. That's called a rocket ship. We're on the up, right? Technology couldn't keep up. We started to choke. We had problems developing features. We were spending all our time fixing what we'd done rather than doing new things. And my board directors, Jason, the guy I was close to, said, we should cut spending on marketing because you're not converting the deals. Common sense, right? No, that's exactly when you need to double your marketing budget. Because when your product's crap, you need to cover that up, all right? I mean, I'm real. It's like we needed twice as many leads because we're converting half as many of them, all right? And it almost killed us. And another version of this is my co-founder, who's still a good friend and was a co-founder at 60, he had to leave Cloudy early on due to illness. And suddenly we were out a CTO. And we're all tech, so we're like, let's just carry on doing it. We'll find one, we'll find one, we'll find one. And then there came a moment where we had the right person, but the board wouldn't let us hire because we had to give them, the recruiter, some stock. It was a new thing. We didn't know it was a new thing. And then suddenly we hit the choppy water, we couldn't raise money, and we were without a CTO for 2.5 years. It almost killed the company, all right? But I thought we could keep doing it ourselves. So there's this kind of self-deception, and your gut is very important. I know I've got an advantage there, but we'll come to that in a minute, okay? So, you can't do it without luck. Sorry. Every single startup that wins is lucky. There's lots of stuff that should go wrong that doesn't. You're lucky. You could have the best team, the best idea, the best investors. You still need luck, all right? Now, for example, for me, I was lucky with timing on Cloudability. Now, Cloudability is not my first startup. And you'll be shocked to hear this. My first startup was in 1987. It was a video games company called Silicon Genetics. I ran for 4 years. And Cloudability, depending on what you call a startup, if you include every entity, it might be my 9th startup, but probably my 5th funded startup. And I started it by accident. So this is the story. I was working in Kansas City at another startup. I was a general manager of a division. We had our second kid. My wife had no help. I was at a startup. So she came back here to be near family. So I quit my job. I had 10 ideas I was going to try and work out for the coming year of 2010. And years earlier, I'd fallen down some stairs in the UK. Now, one of the things I love about this country, I love many things about this country, is you can see a doctor to stay healthy. But in the rest of the world, you see a doctor when you're ill, all right? So I fell down these stairs in London in the mid-90s, and I knew I was in trouble because everyone came running over instead of just letting me fall down the stairs. But I didn't see a doctor. And years later, I'm at dinner in 2010, and I get up, and there's ketchup on my pants, but no, it's blood. And I go to the emergency room at Stanford University, and they have to operate, and I'm out of work for 5 months. 5 months. No Obamacare, no health care, 2 kids, third on the way, no job. And I got to a point where fairly illiquid, right? And so I couldn't work on I was in ad tech space for 10 years. I couldn't do any of those businesses. So I called around 50 people I knew on LinkedIn, and I said, I'm going to do this thing called the cloud. We've been using the cloud for the last couple of years by accident again. The data center had burned down. Seriously, all right? The guy who built it had moved to Africa and not told us. We met a guy on the internet and moved to Egypt. He was a bit of an ass. So in an emergency, we started using Amazon Cloud. We were not visionaries. We just did it because we had to, right? So I wrote around 50 people. I said, I'm going to do this for some people. Would you be a referee for me? And 3 of them said, oh, can you do that for me? By the way, if you ever want work, this is a great way to ask 50 people for work. But they were buddies, and they gave me a deal. And the thing about cloud is it takes away all financial control. Your engineers can deploy what they like, when they like, and the accountants have got no way of stopping it. So pretty quickly, my 3 buddies were really pissed off at these giant bills that were coming in. And they kept calling me almost every day. How much are we spending? What's the bill like? So because they were buddies, I couldn't charge them a $400 fee every time they did this. So I wrote a tool to do it for them automatically. And tried to get back to my other life. And I went to Iceland on a contract, trying to get the cash back in again. And when I got back, I turned off my phone. It was full of these voice messages from these strangers, people I'd never met, who were getting the email I was sending my buddies, which was being automatically forwarded to the accountants. The system had broken, and there was a whole bunch of angry people demanding I turned it back on. And that's how we found the cloudability. All right? Now, the crucial thing is, you have the luck, you've got to have the balls to chase it. And we had a 3rd child coming in 3 months. So I waited a little bit on this, and when Freya was born, I started, and I showed a promotional page to a local guy I've been working with, like a Dave. And he said, I was very proud of him. I'm an engineer. This is beautiful, right? I'm embarrassed about it now. He said, can I have a day or 2 with it? I can't let you go out like this. And what he came back with was so amazing that I had to have him as a co-founder. The only problem is, he had twins due in a month, and his wife was in med school. So when he came back from the hospital, I was waiting for him with a bottle of champagne to go, hey, congratulations. But what I was really there for was to give him a take it or leave it, do it today, because if he spent 1 night with those twins, there was no way he was going to start a startup. And that's how we started a startup with 5 kids under 3, 3 kids under 3 months, and 1 wife in med school. All right? So you have the luck, but you've got to take it. Now, the other thing you've got to have is you've got to have the wherewithal to do it. You've got to have the emotional, physical, financial strength to do it. And too many times I see people stay right to the end. They get strung out, not just on the money, but on the energy. And the way you make the luck is you do this half a dozen times. The most expensive thing you'll ever lose money on in your life is opportunity cost. So you do your startup, and they call fail it fast, all right? Don't hang on to the shipwreck. If it's not going, do something else. And that might sound, there's those things that are simple but not easy. I get it, all right? But you'll get your luck eventually. And I had the timing. Now, we started Cloudability. We told our wives we had to move back to the Bay to get funding, because in 2010, nobody was ever going to raise money in this part of the world. Well, by complete luck that year, 3 companies in town, Urban Airship, Puppet, and Jive, raised $10 or $20 million. Suddenly, it was credible. And investors were going, ooh, Portland, bargain. And we raised money effortlessly, all right? So that was complete luck, but we were all over it when it happened. So be prepared to do this several times. Don't set yourself up that when you fail, it's a disaster. And just accept that when the time comes, you've got to chase after that opportunity. So, second to last one, excuse me. Right, so before we go into gut, I want to talk about 2 definitions, like we talked about startups. And these are important because they change how you frame it. Framing is so important. I had a neighbor in California, Corinne, in her 70s, and she said to me when she was a little girl, she was about 6 years old, she wanted to impress her mother by going to do the washing up. So she's off to do the washing up, like, what a good girl, get an approval. And on the way, Mum says, Corinne, go do the washing up. She's like, and she did exactly the same effort with exactly the same outcome, and it was much, much harder because it was framed as she must do it, but she chose to do it. So when we think about things differently, we feel about them differently, we behave that we're more powerful. An error is an undesirable outcome, a suboptimal outcome due to a lack of something, experience, knowledge, time, luck. It was compellingly the right decision when you made it, but it wasn't now, okay? You should have a modest error rate because science shows that if you make a decision with 80% of the data, the returns drop off massively if you wait for 90 or 100%. So if you have no errors, you're making every decision with all the data, you're making decisions too slowly. Mistakes are where you repeat or compound the error. You know it's an error, yet you keep doing it because you're pot committed. Tyler, my poker player guy, he knows what I'm talking about there. Or you do it again. And I'll give you some examples of that later. You should have a very low mistake rate. I made 3 mistakes at Cloudability. I've already told you about 2 of them. And one mistake I made over and over again, and I've learned not to, right? But, and then type 1 and type 2 decisions. This is an Amazon thing, and I always get them in the wrong order, so it doesn't really matter. There's one type of decision where you can go back and do it again. If you don't like these curtains, it's pretty straightforward to change the color of the curtains, all right? And you shouldn't spend more time and money on making those decisions than it would cost to reverse them. The other type of decision is, honey, I want a divorce. You can't go back on that. There's no world where you go, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't think that through, okay? And so when we're talking about trusting your gut, there's this kind of grid of mistakes and errors, and there's a lot of psychology in this, but also how easily can I press Control Z, all right? And there's this moment you have in your life when you knew intuition was very powerful, but it's a slight feeling. My wife is terrible at navigating. I'm pretty good at it, but it's a vague pigeon sense. And she'll go, take a left. And I'm like, oh, and now I'm completely lost. I don't know where I'm at, all right? So people who are overly confident can really screw up that sense of intuition. And the trick here is reflection. And reflection by talking to others. If you have someone that you trust, doesn't have to be a very close friend, you talk an issue through, you immediately remove some of the bullshit. The bullshit might be up or down. It might be I'm the greatest or I'm the worst, but you only say the bit in the middle to the other person. It's like, In coding, they call it rubber ducking. You talk a technical problem through to your rubber duck on the desk, right? When you do that, you're hearing the problem again in your voice with less bullshit. And if you get good at reflection, you get good at paying attention to your intuition. And let me give you some examples. I was one of those kids, I had a weird upbringing. I'm the office affair, so I wouldn't exist today because you're not allowed to date people at work. I had 11 siblings, but I was one of 2 from the office affair. And I got a scholarship to go to Hogwarts, paid for by Margaret Thatcher. It was a special program, very small, for smart kids who were very ignorant to go to a boarding school paid for by the British government. And in the first year they did this in assisted places, 14,000 kids applied and 12 of them got it, and I was one of those 12. This is what you had to be. This is how ignorant you had to be. I'm one of the smartest kids in the country, and I didn't know my alphabet. I failed my English exam that year. That's how poorly taught we were at that government school. I skipped a year, so I went through school with everyone a year older than me. I finished high school at 17, but in the meantime, my dad threw me out at 16 because I founded a business at 15 that caused a lot of friction, this video game business. So I'm 15, 16, 17 years old, running a business. I didn't go to university. And I hired a guy called David, who was twice my age. And this guy was a piece of work. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but basically, we ended up having a giant argument, and I wanted to fire him. Now, in England, firing's much harder than it is here, but I was still going to fire him. And every single person around me told me, give him another go. And I was just under 19 at the time, and I wasn't so arrogant to think, well, I know better than all of you. If one person had said, go fire him, I would have fired him. Well, he wasn't happy with this argument, and so he decided to leave. We had a weird way of sharing the royalties for the video games, and someone said to him, well, take some computer gear, and they'll pay out the royalties they owe you. Well, he had this fantastic list. He ended up taking everything out of the office. And this is the weird thing. It was Friday, May 31st, 1991. My mother was born on Friday, May 31st, 1935, and we sold Cloudability on Friday, May 31st, 2018. Isn't that kind of weird, right? Anyway, and if I'd known back then, in 1991, there was going to take 28 years to get to a big exit, I wouldn't have done this way. It's much harder than I thought. At 19, I thought it might take a decade tops, right? But the point is that my gut was right. And that has happened 2 more times in my life, where I ignored my feeling to do what others were telling me. At the end of the day, you're accountable for your decisions. And I think everyone in this room's probably got a moment where they knew something was wrong, but they carried on anyway. And reflection, being able to talk things through with people around you is a great way. Being vulnerable enough to talk about the problem is, to me, the most consistent way I've been able to act on my gut, because you don't know if you're right. You don't know if you're just tricking yourself. As you get older, this gets easier, but it's never easy. And the biggest bad outcomes in my life were when I ignored my gut. Last one, don't do it alone. This is a very lonely job. Those sleepless nights when you're worried about cash or failing, it's bad for you. It's bad for the people around you. Investors don't like single founders because you can make one dumb decision to tank the business. They actually want you to have co-founders. So when you do something dumb, your co-founders go, what? And you go, all right, well, no, maybe not this time, okay? I'm going to put it all on black and we're going to double our funding, you know? And there's this thing called imposter. Who here has heard of imposter syndrome? All right, yeah. So I was lucky enough to go to a boot camp up in the mountains with a guy called Jerry Colonna. He's known as the CEO whisperer. And he charges $5,000 an hour to talk to the country's top CEOs. He made a CNN anchor cry live on television. He's one of the best CEO coaches in the world. And we went to the very first boot camp. And we were asked to write a letter to each other. There were 12 CEOs about how hard it is running your company. I didn't read the instructions right. I just heard write a letter to the CEOs. So we meet up in this ranch in Colorado. It's a Wednesday evening. We're all meeting each other. We're all bullshitting, plus 25% all our numbers. We're all talking in the current tense instead of the future tense. Instead of saying, we will do this, we are doing this. We're all bullshitting, you know. We're killing it. And we sit down to dinner. And after dinner, we go to these chairs. And underneath these chairs, the letters we've written each other. They're anonymized, so no one knows whose is whose. And everyone else's letter is like, do you worry that if people found out how shit you were at your job, they'd fire you? Are you worried you're screwing up your business, all right? And mine is, how you doing? Can I help you? Can you help me? And everyone laughs. So we're feeling pretty crappy, but I'm feeling worse, all right? And Jerry says, how are we doing? And there's this tension, and no one wants to speak. I tend to deal with tension with humor. So I said, am I the only one about to have a panic attack here? And everyone laughed nervously. And Jerry gets down to do the very first crouching Jerry, where he goes down like this, and he goes, tell me more. And I cried more that evening than the rest of my life up to that point. And everyone else in the room were also crying or trying not to cry. And we were off to the races. And we reenacted Predator, the movie Predator, over the next few days. And Jerry's the Predator, and he's hauling out, instead of the spines out of these big tough men and women, he's pulling the heart out and showing it to him, put it back the right way. And ever since then, being able to talk to other people candidly, it is a superpower when you're running an organization, because you can talk about your problems and people want to help you more than you realize. Now, the way you can practice this is to ask other people what their problems are and then think how you can help them. And I'll give you a really good example of how this works. The guy who designed our t-shirts, who's now a successful startup CEO, when we had that CTO problem, we hired someone, and the next day private equity bought their business, so they couldn't join. And then we hired someone else, and they got diagnosed with cancer, so they couldn't come work for us, right? So we're thinking of a jinx on this stuff, right? And our t-shirt guy is having drinks with 3 guys who started a business here in town. Their CEOs had to quit because their daughter was ill, and they're running out of money, but they could probably raise more money and find another CEO. So they're deciding what to do. And at exactly the right time, Alex said to them, have you thought about coming to Cloudability? And we acquired that company for $1 million, best $1 million I ever spent, and they 1,000x our capacity. It's amazing, all right? These guys are incredible. And, but because I spent time thinking about other people's problems, they return the favor. You can practice on the people who help you. You can just say hello to the barista or the flight attendant. But like paying attention to other people's problems allows you to share yours, and it is a superpower. And you know what? It's a lot shittier doing this by yourself. For many years, I thought I had to show the strength. I had to be getting it right. I had the imposter syndrome, and I couldn't ask for help because that would show I'm fucking it up. All right? Now, I was paid, I said to some of you, I think before, I was paid in the 90s to go make friends in foreign places for American companies. I call myself the American Culture Ambassador. Basically, when you're doing these large projects overseas, you can't just tell people to do things. You have to win their respect and support. So I was paid to make friends. I was paid to network. And 6CAI, the company running today, is a networking tool, right? There's no better place in the world than the Pacific Northwest to ask for help. And that's the truth. People here will open the Rolodexes, they'll fall out. If there's any service you need, like, Dave, what's the name of the company that makes physical things?
Sigma.
Sigma, right? There's probably a couple of other companies. If you want to make a widget, ask someone. Do you know a company around here that makes widgets? Someone will know someone, all right? And people are keen to help. But you can start that by helping them first. Anyway, what was I saying? Right. These lessons are called wisdom. Being smart is knowing the tomato is a fruit, but only by not putting in a fruit salad that you know a tomato doesn't go in a fruit salad. That's wisdom. These are our collective community wisdom. When we share our learnings, we can all do better. And this is real data. There's nothing I've told you that changes. If I told you how to raise a round, what I did in 2011, when I did it in 2022, it was very different. All right? When I tell you about working from home or the office, that's different. These lessons are hardcore human nature. They should help us all. And I'd love to hear about your learnings. And it's too late for you, but you can still save me, all right? And together we can just make this a little bit easier. And please reach out if you think I can help in any way. There's so many socials today. You find me on LinkedIn. I'm Matt with one T. Don't type Ricky Gervais. And I'd like to leave with just one last thing, all right? I don't want to make this sound too hard. With the help, it's going to be great fun, very satisfying. Anyone who's worked with me knows I have this in my office next to the "If you fear change, leave it here" cup with some pennies in it. And this is the man in the ring from Teddy Roosevelt. And trying and failing can be very fulfilling. You know, I think they teach sports in schools, so you learn how to lose, like what to do when you don't win, all right? And if it's not for people like us who try and fail, others build on our shoulders. They look at what you do, and you learn. By the way, if you want to do a startup, you've never done one, go work for a startup and fail on other people's time and money. But just trying, please try. It's what builds our world into a better place. Don't be afraid. Have the courage to have a go. And if you need a coffee or a beer because it's not going well, give me a call and say, I didn't say it would be easier, but I'll be here to listen to whatever your problems are. Okay? Thank you.
Thanks,